This bride read her cheating fiancé's texts at the altar instead of her vows. Susan and Alex had been dating for 6 years. After finally getting engaged, they were thrilled to start planning the big day. But not everything went as expected. The couple had agreed that they wanted a traditionally styled wedding and had agreed that inviting tons of friends and family would be a good idea for the important day. However, as they moved closer to their wedding day, nothing could prepare them for the drama that was about to unfold. As a couple, the pair had been together for quite some time. Over the course of their relationship, their love for one another grew tremendously. They felt as though they could trust one another with their most intimate feelings and believed that their love for one another was as close to real as it could get. They were so close that their parents had even become friends with one another, and their feelings for one another were more than mutual. They were practically made for each other, or so she thought. As the couple managed to finalize the plans for their wedding, they were grateful that they had finished all the planning on time and on budget. Now it was time to party. Both Susan and Alex had agreed that spending the night before their wedding apart would be a good idea for them to experience a little freedom for the last time, before the big day. Susan organized a bachelorette party for herself and her friends at a nice hotel and let go for one last night. Susan and Alex had been together for a long time, and the couple had decided that getting married and moving their relationship to the next level would be the best idea at this point. They had been discussing the idea of getting married for quite some time, and so now that they were finally just one night away from the important day, the reality was starting to dawn on them for the first time that they would soon be united together forever, or so they hoped. Back at the hotel though, Susan and her friends were partying it up and really making the most out of their night. For the first time, Susan realized that this would be her last night as an unmarried woman. While she was incredibly excited that the big day of her wedding had finally arrived, there was something inside of her that made her feel a little anxious at the thought. But she knew she wanted to be with Alex and was eager for them to get married. As the evening carried on and the drinks continued to flow, Susan and her friends were really enjoying themselves. Time flew by like it was nothing, and before they knew it, the group were already happily singing into the early morning hours and laughing hysterically. As they made their way back to the hotel room, things started to wind down as the bridesmaids either passed out on the nearest available bed or kept talking quietly among one another. They certainly had one awesome bachelorette party. While the ladies were all getting showered, changed, and ready for bed, Susan was chatting to a friend about the wedding when her phone sounded a beep. She checked it only to find a message waiting for her from a mysterious private number. As she opened the message, her eyes widened as she scrolled through the contents of it. There were lewd pictures of her fiancé Alex and another woman, as well as loads of personal messages sent between them. Susan couldn't believe what was happening. When Susan first read the message, it took her a while to really process what was actually happening. At the end, the message read, "I wouldn't marry him. Will you?" Susan scrolled over the pictures again to make sure this wasn't some kind of sick joke, but in plain sight, she could see Alex and this other woman together had been having an affair for a while and had even seen each other but a few days ago. Susan just sat there in shock and slowly started to cry. As Susan started to cry, her friends came to comfort her. She couldn't control herself and was incredibly emotional. Of all the things that could happen to you the night before your wedding, having a message sent to you proving that your husband-to-be is cheating on you was simply too much for Susan to handle. While she cried, her bridesmaids were promising to deal some serious damage to Alex for hurting her like this. Susan was at a total loss for words. After a while, Susan wiped the tears from her eyes but still couldn't seem to put her feelings into words. While her friends were getting themselves worked up and offering a variety of different ways to hurt Alex or get revenge, Susan was just feeling totally lost. It was like her whole life just came crashing down in front of her in a matter of seconds. She was totally numb inside and couldn't really believe what was actually happening to her, especially at this moment in her life. Susan was completely distraught. Not only was this the worst possible time to find out about her fiancé's cheating, but they had already paid for all the costs of the wedding. Susan's friends were suggesting that perhaps she consider canceling the wedding rather than go through with something that she knew was a sham. This was all too much for Susan, who had literally gone into a state of shock. She just sat there motionless for a while, trying to figure out what to do. Most people consider cheating a serious offense in a relationship, and Susan was certainly the victim in this case. While cheating is generally frowned upon, there are a few reasons as to why this may happen in the first place. Sometimes the person cheating is driven to infidelity because they find a problem with the relationship that they feel they can't discuss, or they don't share romantic feelings for the person they're in a relationship with. Either way, Susan didn't want excuses or reasons at this point in time. Susan kept scrolling over the messages and trying her best to process what had happened to her in such a short space of time. Some of the messages were incredibly detailed and contained explicit detail about Alex's affair with the other woman, which really hurt Susan. For the rest of the night, she just sat there trying to work out what she was supposed to do next. She was frozen with sadness, shock, and humiliation and couldn't seem to find a way out of the situation. Because the girls had been up partying the whole night, the morning light was fast approaching, bringing with it the day of her wedding. Susan had only really been able to slowly sit there for most of the early morning trying to figure out what to do next. She was trying to decide whether or not she should cancel her wedding in light of the news she had received about her fiancé, but as you can imagine, this couldn't be an easy decision for a bride to make. Without saying anything to her bridesmaids, most of whom had either already fallen asleep or were just outside of Susan's room talking about the drama that had just happened, Susan started laying out her dress, jewelry, and accessories that she had planned to wear for the day. As the morning light shone in through the window in her hotel room, Susan had a sudden idea. She knew what she was going to do and how she was going to get her revenge. As day broke on the day of her wedding, Susan slowly got dressed up in her bridal gown with the help of her friends and started getting ready for the day. While they kept asking her what she was going to do, assuming she was going through with the wedding at this point, Susan reassured them. While she was still incredibly hurt about what had happened to her, she realized that she had to do something about this rather than pretend it never happened. As the morning sun rose higher, it revealed a truly beautiful day ahead for the wedding to take place. Susan couldn't help but wonder how she could feel so bad on what was supposed to be one of the happiest moments in her life. Despite her sadness and the anger that her friends were feeling, Susan asked them to go along with the day as if nothing had happened. She wanted it to seem like everything was going according to plan. As the day moved forward, every minute felt like an hour to Susan. She tried her best to keep a straight face with the fellow guests and was grateful that Alex was only due to arrive closer towards the reception. Otherwise, the day couldn't have been better as friends and family from both sides were mingling, laughing, and enjoying the otherwise jovial celebrations. But just under the surface of the otherwise joyous sentiment in the air, Susan knew that things would be taking a turn for the dramatic. As the day went on, the time of the ceremony was approaching fast. Soon, Alex had arrived and Susan did her best to hide her true feelings from him. As the guests got seated for the reception ceremony, Susan got ready to walk down the aisle with her father. She was a complete flurry of emotions at this point and had started crying already, although they probably looked like tears of joy to the onlookers. After making her way down the aisle, she got ready to say her vows. Susan had already suffered one of the most emotional nights of her life. As she walked down the aisle, it was as though she was in some kind of dream and she knew she was in the dream, but simply couldn't wake up. Once she reached the stage where Alex was waiting, she wiped tears out of her eyes and looked into Alex's eyes. He smiled at her. She faked a queasy smile and soon he was reading his vows to her. By the time Alex had finished saying his vows, Susan was looking pretty emotional. She was sickened about the fact that he could read his vows to her while she knew he was already cheating on her. When the time came for Susan to read her vows to Alex, she froze up. For a moment, she didn't know what to do, then reminded herself to stick to her plan. As she wiped tears from her eyes, she cleared her throat and turned to address the guests directly. Becoming very emotional at this point, Susan slowly started addressing the large crowd that had gathered. She was holding her phone instead of her vows and then suddenly said, "There will be no wedding today." There were audible gasps from the audience and confused looks everywhere. Then Susan began reading the messages that had been sent to her on her phone in all their graphic detail. The crowd went quiet as Susan explained that there would be no wedding due to Alex's infidelity. While Susan emotionally read through the hurtful messages, Alex didn't spend much time hanging around and quickly ducked out of the ceremony to the shock of his parents and hers. Susan tried her best to cheer herself up and wipe the tears out of her eyes. Despite the silence that had befallen the ceremony, Susan told the guests that there would be no wedding today, but rather a celebration of honesty and finding the right person in love and life. Susan's story has become an online sensation ever since.